Hi everyone, Jeff Hurd here with the Geneva Music Festival. We are excited to wrap up our virtual season today with a profile of violinist Ani Kavafian. Ani is my former teacher. She has been a huge inspiration to me, and we've been lucky to present her at the Geneva Music Festival numerous times over the last decade. Today we will share stories from her childhood, her thoughts on her former teacher, the famous pedagogue Ivan Galamian, as well as her thoughts on what students need to consider as they approach their career today. Throughout the interview, you will also hear 3 performances of Ani's from her time at the Geneva Music Festival. The first is the first movement of Beethoven's Ghost Piano Trio, Opus 70, number 1, Schubert's Cello Quintet, the first movement, and the first movement of Dvorak's Piano Quintet. So I hope that you have enjoyed our virtual season. All the footage is available on our YouTube channel, and we look forward to performing for you again in person next summer.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Istanbul, Turkey, into a family of musicians, professional musicians. My parents met in the Istanbul State Symphony. My father was the principal violist, and my mother was in the first violin section. In turn, my mom had a sister that was a pianist, a father that was like a violinist, kind of, a little bit, and my father had a huge family of music behind him. His brother was a very famous organist who had married a piano professor in Istanbul, who became my first piano teacher at the age of 3. So I started kind of early, Jeffrey. When we came to the United States in 1956, because of the riots in Turkey, the Cyprus riots, where Armenians weren't really, that we weren't wanted there, my parents brought us to America, and we went to a suburb of Detroit where he had a job. So we lived near Detroit, and I went to a school and they needed string players. So they gave me a $15 scholarship. With $15, I got 5 lessons, and the guy came to my house.
Wow.
And he happened to be Armenian. And he was a phenomenal teacher. He became my stepfather. My mom, my father passed away, and he married my mom. And Ida and my sister and I both studied with him, and we loved him. And he was so good. He also has taught Georgia Flazanis. You might know her as the concertmaster of Minneapolis. And then Robert Vernon, the principal violist of Cleveland. And he had an incredible array of students, and we learned to love it. I think that's so key, to love it, because your teacher makes you love it. And so I started playing the violin, and I practice. I would come home, practice piano, practice violin, and then starting midnight, or not, I would do my homework until midnight. So we went in the summertime to the Interlaken National Music Camp at Interlaken. I'm sure you probably heard it. And I think my culminating experience on violin and piano together was one year when they had concerto competitions, and I won on the piano and on the violin. And that was, I thought, okay, I've done what I need. And I stopped the piano actually the year after that, because I just felt like I wanted to concentrate on the violin. I loved the violin. I was concertmaster of the orchestra, and the piano you were practicing by yourself at home. So I chose the violin. I'm really, really glad. Teacher. I ended up studying in Detroit for quite a number of years after he became my stepfather. After Mr. Z, Ara Zarunian, he decided I should go to Mishakov, who was teaching there. Misha Mishakov, who was the concertmaster.
So this was at University of Michigan?
No, he was not there. This is confusing maybe, but after Ara Zarunian, I went to Mishakov for 5 years. And at that point, I was ready to, to go to college.
Right.
And I wanted to, and he was not teaching at college, but the teacher I had in the summertime, Joseph Knitzer, was teaching at the University of Michigan. I loved him. I wanted to study with him. So he was doing that, but my mom said, no, you got to go to New York.
Did you go? So where did you end up getting your bachelor's degree?
At Juilliard.
At Julia. Okay, so you did your bachelor's and master's then at Julia.
And master's, and 2 years into my doctoral studies.
Wow.
I don't know if you know, since you've been studying, in that realm, do you know this man called Gustav Ries? He wrote tons of books about musicology and music and history. And he would pace from one end of the room to the other, talking, give us information. I'm like going crazy writing stuff down, because in those days you didn't type it out, you wrote it out. So that was 2 years into the studies. I decided, okay, maybe I better practice more. So
was Galamian your teacher the whole time that you were
8
in New York?
years.
8 years. Oh,
years.
so you studied
8
with him for a
years.
very long time.
A very long time. And he was one of these teachers, I'm sure you've heard the stories, but he was one of these people that would give you a fingering that everybody else was doing, basically. You would copy fingerings from someone else, and you'd have to do it. And if he saw you not doing one of the fingerings, if you used a third finger instead of a fourth finger, he would make you do all the same bowings. Every student of Galamian had bowings and fingerings that were the same. Never mind that my hands are, half the size of Pinky, or Ed Sox, but we all had the same finger. Exactly. I learned a tremendous amount from him, and I attribute him with the idea of learning a technique. In fact, the first 3 months, all I did was scales and arpeggios and some Kreutzer. And finally, at the end of that, I got the Sinding Suite. I got Sinding Suite. I've never been so happy to play a piece of music. But yeah, I saw it's still to this day, I look at the Galamian edition of the Gabinier Etudes, and also even the Bach, and I see his reasoning behind whatever he chose. And much of it had to do with trying not to cross strings too often,
right,
making it easier for the right hand, doing a lot of left hand stretches and kind of snaky kind of fingerings to avoid too many shifts. But he had a philosophy, and that was one of them. He had one part of his philosophy: less bow changes, bow crossings, and less shifting. But I had some incredible chamber music coaches at Juilliard, and Felix Galimir was one of them.
Okay.
So my musical takeaways were from 3 summers at Marlborough, and with Felix Galimir and Paul Makonovitsky, and a lot of phenomenal teachers that I studied with at Juilliard. Galamian was not, he didn't concentrate on, let's say, color or character as much as those guys did. And so my influences musically did actually come from Marlborough and from Felix Galimir mostly. I'll tell you one thing, my first summer at Meadowmont, where Galamian's camp was, I came from Detroit, right? I go to New York, I go to the music festival that Galamian has. First concert, let's see, Joseph Yankolev, F sharp minor, Vinyavsky, real, Kyungwa Chung, Cookie, Stravinsky Concerto, Pinky, Tchaikovsky Concerto. I think, was that the end of the concert? Anyway, like, I'm going, oh my God, I gotta go home. I don't want to be here. This is not my gang. But these were all, really influential people, of course. And, that summer, Michael Rabin came and did a concert as well. So Galamian's circle had a tremendous amount of incredible talents to get stuff from his studio, where I used to warm up, had all of his famous students lined up all around the studio. And then you would go into his teaching studio, and all around the walls were the most famous violinists of the time. Auer, Chrysler. Oh, and all signed to Mr. Galamian. You know, it was like, whoa, I'm in the midst of royalty. And then when I left Juilliard and I auditioned for the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center with Charles Wadsworth, I was given a loan, another Del Gesù, by one of the sponsors, one of the board members of the Chamber Music Society. So I grew up a little bit on the Del Gesù mode. When I had to give that violin back, Jeffrey, I was like, oh God, I am so spoiled at this point, you know,
Exactly.
ridiculously spoiled, ridiculous. And I had a nice violin. I had a Landolfi.
Right.
But
it's not the same thing.
Yeah. So I went to try to find a violin, and I did. Jacques Francais had a Strad that came in one morning, and I went in and I tried it. I didn't fall in love with it, but there were two other Strads there. One was Itzhak Perlman's old Strad, and I liked this one better than that one. And there was also, I think there was a Guadagnini there too. But in any case, I took several violins to Alice Tully Hall and tried them out, and everyone said, this Strad is the one you should get. So at the time, you would think you could afford it, but I was a student still.
Right.
I went to 7 banks to try to get a loan. 7. And one bank basically said, well, we can give you a loan if you're buying a car or buying a house, but we don't know what the collateral is on an instrument.
Exactly.
So, but my bank, my last bank was Citibank that I went to. I was pretty disheartened at this point. Nobody was giving me money. So I went to Citibank and I sat down, and the guy looked up and he said, I know you. He had gone to Chamber Music Society concerts, and he knew my face and he knew my playing. He gave me the loan, and then I played concerts and cooked dinners for people, and you know, I did everything to try to get the money up because I needed to. I was spoiled, as I said. I had to buy a great violin, and I'm so glad I did.
So I wanted to get a
Yeah.
little bit into your life as a performer and how you got your first break into the performing scene. What was your big,
Yeah.
did you have a big defining moment that kind of launched your career?
Yeah, I actually did. And it had something to do with Michael Steinberg, the critic from the Boston newspaper there many years ago. And what happened was that I got a cancellation call. I was with Young Concert Artists. I had won an audition with Young Concert Artists. That was great. And I was playing concerts for them and, you know, in different places. And one cancellation call came in for the Mozart A Major Concerto with Baltimore Orchestra in Baltimore, not the Baltimore Symphony, but orchestra. And it was outside, okay? It was outdoors.
Wow.
It was horrible, really humid, but I played. And Michael Steinberg was in the audience. At this point, he was also music, like one of the music, not a director like conductor, but of the Philadelphia Orchestra. So when the Philadelphia Orchestra needed a soloist for their summer concerts in Ann Arbor, they had a series in Ann Arbor, Michael got me to play there. And the conductor was Aldo Ciccato. And I remember that so well because what a thrill to play with a, you know, Philadelphia Orchestra all behind you. It's pretty nice. He was also conducting the Detroit Symphony at that time too. And also Cleveland, he had a concert with Cleveland. He got me to come and play at Cleveland. And so I got from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And it just breaks that you just are lucky to get. You know, if it happens, it does happen, but it's like a true miracle sometimes because you can win, you know, competitions and never get a chance to play with Cleveland and Philadelphia and Detroit and Baltimore and, you know, just I just that was a defining moment. I think another defining moment I would say was definitely winning Young Concert Artists and then having Susan Wadsworth take me to her husband Charles Wadsworth so that I would play for him to see if I could play with the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. And I used to go to concerts with the Chamber Music, you know, with them. I would sit in the audience and listen and say, this has got to be the best job in the world. You're in New York, you're home, and you play with some of the great players of all time. So that was a huge, and you know, I'm still playing with them. And so that was in 1974 or 5, something like that. I'm the longest surviving person at the Chamber Music Society.
Furthering our discussion of performance, what do you think the most important attribute somebody needs to be a successful performer? And that could be just to survive in the career or a musical attribute or anything. What's that?
Yeah, well, surviving is a good one. I think it depends on what you're doing. You know, taking auditions is one thing. Being a soloist or being a chamber musician is another thing. Let me address what I know, because I've actually played in orchestra quite a lot. But the way I sense my career having taken off was directly related to communication. In other words, how you play as a communicator, what you do with the piece of music at hand, how you communicate characters, moods, colors, all of that I think is really, really important, even when you're taking an audition. You know, of course, it's important to play perfectly for an orchestral audition, but I think people are wanting to hear a musician's ear and a musician's sound. So I think that's still very important. I had one student who was 19 years old, and he auditioned for the LA Philharmonic. He was very young, and I never thought he had a chance, right? Because he had a very unusual way of playing. Gorgeous, beautiful, but heartfelt. And so I was thinking, I don't know, in orchestra, they might got the job. Anyway, so I have a feeling that if the right people are listening to you, they know a true musician's ear and a sound that somebody is making. So intonation is very important in an audition. So when I audition people for Yale, I think I try really hard to think, okay, if the intonation is such a, can I work with this student? You know, is this student, does he have a musical soul?
Right.
And I've been so lucky with picking the right people. But I feel like my ear goes to the people that have something to say.
Right.
And if it's not perfect, it's not perfect. I can always work on perfect, you know, unless there's something really like that. Anyway, so I think a musical soul, a brain, and the ability to communicate.
Yeah, very good. That's interesting. So, and you're doing quite a bit of teaching these days. How many years have you been teaching at Yale now?
I think you said how many years have I taught at Yale, right?
Yes. Oh,
Or
we
just in general.
We got a little choppy there for a second. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So, I mean, I've been teaching. I started teaching. My first teaching job was at Manus in New York.
Okay.
And then Manhattan. And then I went to McGill University in Montreal for a few years, teaching a few students. And then Stony Brook. And then Yale. And when I got the Yale job, I you know, you have to, if you're going to be a full professor, you can't teach at other schools. So it was good because it focused me on one place. And I've been there, I think 13 years at this point.
Yeah. And so what makes a good teacher? What are the skills or aspects that make up a good teacher?
Well, you must know that, teaching as you do. Well, okay, what I think is you have to know certain technical things that are not working with someone or are working, and encourage the ones that are working. But it's so much more than that. I think every teacher has to be a psychologist. And you have to understand your students as soon as possible. Like this last week, I was doing some online teaching in a festival, and I had 4 lessons with each one of the students. I had to pick up what was going on in the first lesson so that I could be helpful.
Right.
So it's sometimes the way they speak, the way they move, you know, even the way they walk around, you have to pick up on everything. And I think it would be a really good thing for a psychologist to come and help every teacher with trying to understand someone's personality. You know, you have to know weak points, you have to know strong points. When you see the strong points, you encourage it like crazy. And I think the weak points, you try to figure out what can change.
What are the biggest mistakes that you see music students make, either in their approach towards the instrument or just their approach towards life and a career?
Wow, that's a good question. I think one of the technical things that students neglect to do is look at a score. I get very frustrated with students that come in with their part of a sonata, but they have no idea what the piano is really doing. And so one of the key things to me is look at the score, especially if you're going to play with an orchestra. You have to know when you're with the clarinet player or with the cellos, or, you know, you have to know things like that. And it doesn't always come from looking at YouTube. So I think studying the score is primary for students to learn how to do that they don't always have in their brain. I think one of the other things that happen with young people is everybody's very anxious to make a career, or and so every audition becomes this, you know, this thing. And usually you don't win auditions when you're like that.
Right.
So you've got to be patient. You've got to be patient. You've got to keep trying. You, one lost audition is not the end of the world. You know, you have to keep working at it. And so I feel like students are sometimes too impatient, and they think, well, you know, or they look at me and I'm so lucky. Well, I want your kind of career. I want to play solo. I want to play chamber music, and I want to teach at a college. Yeah, it just might. I think experience is a fantastic teacher. So let's say you don't get something the first 2 times you tried. Maybe the third time will be easier or better, or whatever it is. But the experience of being on stage, taking auditions, you know, it's there's nothing like it. If people are patient and they know that maybe the 3rd or 4th time around they're going to get it, I think it's possible to get it the first time too. Not, you know, saying anything about you have to have like 10 times at something, but some people are more fortunate than others. Breaks come in different ways. You have to be, I always say, open every door. You know, don't think you're too good for something. You know, you get a chance to play with an orchestra and they're not very, very good. I had a terrible experience once when I did Beethoven concerto with an orchestra that was basically self-taught. And I called the management. I was with Young Concert Artists, and I called and I said, I don't know if I can do this. I mean, the conductor doesn't know how to. I would keep playing the opening phrase, Jeff, you know, and I'd see her going, she's lost. She doesn't know where, she doesn't know where I am. And I'm okay. So I said, okay, let me do that a little more, you know, strictly. Still lost. And she was lost at the concert. Anyway, so you do, but you open that door, and you know, the experience of playing with an orchestra like that, of course, is different than playing with Philadelphia Orchestra. But you learn from that. So I think opening doors is really important for every young person. And to be patient with whenever the breaks come, then you might be ready.
Our theme last year in our 2019 season was celebrating the contributions of women today in the field of music, which is a common theme. We're seeing that happen a lot more, but that hasn't always been the case. And your career started at a time when, I mean, particularly orchestras were probably predominantly men, and we've seen that change quite a bit. But I don't have a question so much as just getting your comments and your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled with what's happened in the last 15 years with orchestras in Europe as well as here. When I was studying, I can't say that I ever felt that I was being discriminated against being a woman. In some ways, when I performed, especially solo, it was, people would always comment on the dress, or, you know, and that's a woman's thing, you know, that it was more interesting for them to watch a woman play with hair flying and the dress moving and, you know, all that business. So I never sensed that. You know, of course, at Juilliard, there were more men than women at the time that I was studying, but still, there was no reason to think that I was being looked on as a second-class citizen. I'm aware in Europe it was more of a situation that all male orchestras, and still to this day it's pretty much, you know, like that in certain places. But you know what? I feel like we have to watch all discrimination, especially these days now with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think we have to really be aware of people that don't get the same chance in this. And I think women are less likely to be prejudiced against at this point than the Black community. So I'm very well, and Yale now is also extremely aware of that particular thing. And you know, celebrating women is good, but also we're trying to celebrate Black composers, Black artists, and we're trying to really, you have to try, because it's there's a long way to go.